The void holds its dead close. At the edge of the infamous Seraphis Drift, a sprawling starship graveyard where countless vessels met their silent end, the salvage ship Scavenger's Hope hangs in the darkness. Captain Elias Vance watches his console, his eyes locked on a sensor anomaly. It is a faint, rhythmic pulse of energy emanating from the wreck of the US Event Horizon, a warship lost for centuries. This is not random static, it is structured, deliberate, a ghost singing from a tomb of metal. His first mate Kayla's voice cuts through the silence over the comms, tense and urgent. Captain, that is not a residual signal, it is a beacon, and it is counting down. By the end of this story, you will uncover the profound secret that turns a graveyard of forgotten souls into a treasure beyond any price, and learn why some echoes should never be disturbed. What awaits is not just a derelict's cargo, but a legacy that rewrites the meaning of death itself. What would you risk to learn the final truth of those who vanished among the stars? The countdown on his screen was a silent, steady metronome. Vance guided the Scavenger's Hope with a surgeon's touch, threading the needle between jagged spars of ruptured deck plating and the frozen, glittering shrapnel of 1,000 hull breaches. Each piece of debris was a monument to a violent end, tumbling in the slow, perpetual ballet of the grave. The shadow of the event horizon loomed, a mountain of scarred metal blotting out the distant stars. One score like this, and we are out of debt to the guild for good, Vance muttered, his eyes never leaving the viewport. The words were less a statement of hope and more a mantra against the creeping dread. From the engineering pit, Rourke's voice was a low growl of skepticism. That is what worries me, Captain. I have pulled the guild's salvage manifest for this sector 3 times. There is no record of a transponder, let alone an active beacon on the event horizon. Not a whisper. This signal was not meant for us. The ship shuddered, a deep metallic groan echoing through the frame as magnetic grapnels fired and locked onto the derelict's hull. The sound was a handshake with a corpse. For a long moment, there was only the hum of their own life support and the visual of the colossal warship resting against their view. Then came the sharp, piercing hiss of atmospheres equalizing, a sound that always felt like the ship itself was holding its breath. The inner airlock door slid open with a reluctant grind, revealing not the lit corridor of a standard docking, but an absolute, consuming darkness. It was not merely an absence of light. It was a thick, velvety black that seemed to swallow the beams from their helmet lamps after only a few meters. A silence so profound it pressed against their ears. The event horizon had opened its mouth and they were stepping inside. The cold inside the event horizon was a physical weight. Their suit lights carved weak cones through the absolute dark, illuminating a corridor frozen in a single, horrific instant. Ice crystals glittered on every surface, and within that ice were figures. The crew. They were not skeletons, but men and women preserved in perfect, crystalline detail, their faces locked in final expressions of pure, uncomprehending terror. One officer was reaching for a sealed hatch, his mouth open in a silent scream. Another had simply curled into a ball on the floor. The air, what little of it remained, tasted of ancient metal and a strange, ozone-like stillness. Kayla moved with a slow, reverent caution, her scanner humming softly. Over here, she whispered, her voice tight in the comms, a command console, it is intact. The seal is still holding after all this time. With a careful application of tools, she breached the protective casing. A holoscreen flickered to life, casting a sickly green glow on her visor. The log entry was corrupted, the image of a gaunt-faced officer breaking into digital snow, but the audio was clear, etched with a panic that transcended centuries. The voice crackled, final log, Chief Science Officer Aris, the core did not fail. Repeat, the core did not overload. We were running a standard diagnostic on the quantum flux drive. And it responded. It was not a malfunction. The core was shown something. It looked into a place, and what looked back? The transmission dissolved into a scream of static and a sound like tearing metal, then cut to silence. "Shown something," the words hung in the frigid air, more chilling than the frozen corpses. Across the corridor, Rourke was running a structural scan of a heavily damaged bulkhead, muttering about energy signatures that made no sense. "Do not move, Captain," he said, his tone suddenly devoid of its usual gruffness. "Just do not move." Vance froze. "What do you see?" "I am not sure I am seeing anything," Rourke breathed. "But the wall behind you, it is breathing." Vance turned slowly. At first, it was just a deeper patch of shadow in the jagged ruin of the wall. Then it shifted. It detached itself, flowing like oil over the fractured metal. It had no true shape, but suggestions of a long, slender limb, a cluster of faint, bioluminescent points that might have been eyes. It was neither fully machine nor fully flesh, but some terrible fusion of both, semi-corporeal and silent as thought. It did not attack, it simply watched them, a sentient shadow studying intruders in its tomb. For 3 heartbeats they stood paralyzed. Then, as if satisfied, the entity simply flowed back into the bulkhead, its form dissolving into the metal seams until not a trace remained. The corridor was empty again, save for the ice and the dead. The silence that followed was louder than any alarm. "What else?" Kayla finally asked, her voice barely audible. "Is not dead in this place." That silent, watchful presence changed everything. The event horizon was not a tomb, it was a cage, and they were now inside it with the thing that had been locked away. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential shape, every faint groan of the hull a whisper. The only path forward was deeper, toward the source of the beacon and the impossible energy signature. The journey to engineering was a descent through a frozen heart. Bulkheads were twisted inward as if the ship had tried to crush itself. They passed more of the crystalline dead, their final moments a gallery of horror that made the team move with a new, shared urgency. The air grew thicker, not with decay, but with a palpable static that made the hairs on their arms stand up, even through their suits. Finally, they forced open the massive, scarred doors to the main engineering bay. What they found defied every salvage manual Vance had ever read. The chamber was pristine, no explosive damage, no radiation scarring. In the center of the vast space, suspended in a web of shimmering containment fields, was the ship's quantum flux core. It should have been a dead, cold sphere of alloy. Instead, it glowed with a soft, internal light, pulsing in perfect time with the beacon they had followed. A low, sub-audible hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound felt in the bones more than heard. It was not breached, it was not even damaged, it was awake. "Fortune," Vance breathed, his fear momentarily eclipsed by a wave of pure, avaricious awe. He took a step toward the core, his mind racing with calculations. "That is a stabilized, unknown energy matrix. The Guild, the corporate labs, they would pay a systems ransom for this. We just need to detune the containment field and extract it." Kayla grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "No, look at the emission pattern." She pointed her scanner at the core, its screen flooding with data. "This is not a power signature. It is a carrier wave, a transmission. The core is not generating energy, Captain. It is acting as a relay. It is calling something." Her words hung between them, charged with the memory of the shadow on the wall. "Calling what?" Vance shot back, frustration edging his voice. "And to where? There is nothing out here but wreckage and vacuum." As if in answer, the core flared. Beams of coherent light lanced out from its surface, weaving together in the air above it to form a complex, 3-dimensional star map. It was a chart of the Seraphis Drift, but not as any nav computer knew it. Every derelict ship in the graveyard was marked, not as debris, but as a single point in a vast, interconnected web of faint, glowing lines. All those lines converged like threads pulled taut on a single, central point deep within the graveyard's most dense cluster. A label flickered into existence beneath it, written in the cold, precise script of the Event Horizon's lost crew. primary coordinate, designation, Cradle. Before either of them could speak, a sharp, system-wide alarm blared in their helmet comms. It was not from the event horizon. It was from the scavenger's Hope, still docked to the hull. Rourke's voice was a distorted shout cut with panic. "Captain, we are being hacked. A remote signal just overrode the command protocols. Thrusters are offline. Life support is cycling to minimum. The airlock doors they are sealing. We are locked in." The holographic map of the Cradle pulsed steadily, a silent, brilliant heart in the dark. The core had not just shown them a location, it had issued an invitation, and it had just bolted the door behind them. The mess hall lights flickered back to life, revealing a man sitting calmly at their table as if he had been waiting for hours. He was gaunt, his jumpsuit a patchwork of different ship fabrics, and his eyes held the weary, fever-bright intensity of someone who had been living in the dark for a very long time. "Dr. Aris Thorne," he said, his voice raspy but precise, "I apologize for the dramatic entry. Overriding your systems was the only way to ensure you did not make a catastrophic mistake." Rourke had his tool wrench raised like a club, but Vance held up a hand, his own anger a cold knot in his chest. "You locked us in with that thing." Thorne gave a slow, grim nod. "To lock something else out. The Guild Enforcer vessel Iron Judgment is now on an intercept course. They have been monitoring this sector for months, waiting for a beacon to activate. They are not here for salvage, Captain. They are here for a weapon." He gestured to the frozen star map still glowing on the main view screen, transmitted from the event horizon's core. "You call it the Cradle. The Varelians, the species who built this graveyard long before humanity crawled from its own cradle, had a different word for it. A soul forge. It is not a data archive. It is a repository of consciousness. Every mind from every ship that died here, every final thought, every scream, every moment of peace before the void took them, the Cradle absorbed it all. The event horizon did not stumble upon it. They were sent to investigate anomalous energy readings and made first contact. Their mistake was trying to communicate." Thorne leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Imagine a library where every book is a living, breathing person trapped on the final page of their story. The Cradle is that library. The core on the event horizon is not a relay calling for help. It is a doorbell, and you just rang it. The proximity alert chose that moment to shriek through the cabin, a sharp, relentless pulse of sound. On the scanner, a new icon resolved a sleek, predatory shape designated Iron Judgment, moving with ruthless efficiency through the debris field, its weapons systems glowing hot. They had just gone from trespassers in a tomb to prey in a hunting ground. The secret of the graveyard was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a prize to be seized, and they were caught squarely in the middle. The Iron Judgment did not hail them. It simply opened fire. A lance of plasma cut through the vacuum where the scavenger's Hope had been a heartbeat before, vaporizing a derelict fuel hauler in a silent, blooming flower of light and shrapnel. They were not being warned or boarded. They were being erased. All thrusters now, Vance roared, slamming the control yoke forward. The old salvage ship groaned in protest but shot ahead, diving into a canyon of wreckage. The Guild ship was a predator, but the graveyard was a labyrinth, and Vance knew its twisted alleys better than any corporate enforcer. Rourke's voice was a strained bark over the comms, his face illuminated by the frantic glow of the damage control panel. "Their targeting scanners are locked. They are painting us with full-spectrum lasers. They are not shooting to disable Cap. They want us dead and buried here." Confirmation came as another plasma burst sheared off a sensor array with a deafening crack, sending the ship into a sickening lateral spin. Alarms screamed. Vance fought the controls, his vision narrowing to the chaotic field ahead. A colossal, ancient colony ship loomed, its hull split open like a rotten fruit. He aimed straight for the tier. "We are going through. Hold on." The scavenger's Hope tilted violently, scraping through the jagged opening in a shriek of tearing metal. Sparks fountained across the viewport as they carved a path through the dead ship's cavernous, corpse-filled interior. It was a blasphemous shortcut, a desecration of a tomb for the sake of survival. But it worked. For a moment, the Iron Judgment sensors lost them in the chaotic mass shadow of the colony ship's hull. "We have a lead, but not for long," Kayla reported, her fingers flying across the nav console. "The densest cluster is just ahead. The Cradle's signal is coming from somewhere in there." The path before them was a navigator's nightmare. It was less a field and more a solidified avalanche of dead starships, fused together by ancient collisions and gravitational tides into a single, planetoid-sized mass of crumpled alloy and frozen history. This was the heart of the graveyard. Vance saw only one route, a narrow passage formed by the collapsed spinal frame of a massive interstellar freighter. It was a tunnel of twisted I-beams and snapped conduits. "It is too tight," Rourke warned, but the scanner behind him flared with the unmistakable energy signature of the Iron Judgment's weapons charging for another volley. Vance did not hesitate. He pushed the throttles to the red line and sent the Scavenger's Hope screaming into the gap. The sound was unbearable. The shriek of their hull plating being peeled away by protruding metal filled the cabin. Then came a deep, resonant boom as their port-side engine nacelle clipped a critical structural member. The entire derelict freighter around them shuddered. Behind them, in a slow-motion ballet of destruction, the tunnel began to collapse. A chain reaction of failing integrity fields and shifting mass sent megatons of debris tumbling into the path of the pursuing guild ship. A temporary barricade of shattered history now lay between them and certain death, but their victory was costly. A chorus of new alarms blared. "Thrusters are failing." Rourke yelled, "We have a hull breach on Deck 2. I am losing containment on the port manifold. We are not flying out of here." The ship was dying in his hands. Vance wrestled with the failing controls, his eyes fixed on the only clear patch on the massive, derelict planetoid ahead. A relatively flat section of what might have been the outer hull of a battleship, now just another scarred plane in the chaotic landscape. Brace for impact. The Scavenger's Hope hit the surface in a grinding, shuddering slide that seemed to last forever. Metal screamed, viewports cracked. Finally, with a final, sickening lurch, the ship came to a rest, tilted at a steep angle, buried in the silent skin of the graveyard itself. The only sound was the desperate hiss of escaping atmosphere and the faint, ghostly hum of the Cradle, now so close they could feel it in their teeth. The silence after the crash was a physical presence, thick with the smell of scorched circuits and fear. Outside the cracked viewport, the landscape was a nightmare of fused starship hulls, a jagged plane of metal that stretched into the perpetual twilight of the graveyard's heart. In the distance, a structure rose from the chaos, utterly alien. It was not a ship. It was a colossal, hollowed-out asteroid, its surface grown over with technology that looked less like machinery and more like petrified coral or the intricate lattice of a bone. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, veins of blue and gold energy threading through its organic-looking form. This was the source of the signal, the Cradle. Thorne pressed a hand against the viewport, his breath fogging the glass, the glyphs on the outer spires. "I can read them." He traced the air as if following invisible text. "It is a Varelian memory vault. The translation is archaic, but the meaning is clear." He turned to them, his eyes wide with a terrible awe. "The graveyard is not an accident. It was never a dumping ground. It is a library, and the ships, the thousands of ships that died here, they are the books. Every wreck, every frozen corpse is a recorded volume. Their final moments, their last thoughts, their very consciousness archived." Vance stared at the pulsating artifact, the scale of the revelation washing over him. A library built from tragedy, a monument to death as data. It was a concept so vast it felt like staring into a black hole. They made their way across the treacherous metal plane, the groans and shifts of the fused derelicts a constant reminder that this entire mass was unstable. Up close, the cradle was even more unsettling. The organic tech surface was warm to the touch through their gloves, and it hummed with a vibration that seemed to sync with their own heartbeats. They found an entrance, a seamless aperture that ear-eyed open as they approached, revealing a corridor of the same living stone, lit from within by the same flowing energy. The light pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern like a sleeping giant's breath. Kayla stopped at the threshold, her hand held out to block the others. Her face was pale in the eerie glow. Wait, if what Thorn says is true, if this place stores consciousness, then it is not a passive archive, it is an active system. It reads, it absorbs. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If we go in there, we might not come out as just us. We could be leaving pieces of ourselves behind or taking pieces of others in. The weight of her warning settled over them. This was no simple treasure vault. It was a psychic maw. Vance looked from the pulsing corridor to the ruined shape of his ship, then to Thorn's desperate, knowing face. The decision, however, was ripped from their hands. From the tangled wreckage high above, dark shapes descended on silent rappel lines, landing with practiced grace in a semicircle around them. Guild assault troopers clad in matte black combat armor, their helmet visors opaque and their weapons raised and humming with lethal charge. The lead trooper's voice was a synthesized crackle. The artifact is Guild property. You are trespassers. Move into the structure now. The muzzle of his plasma rifle left no room for negotiation. Backed by armed force and with nowhere left to run, Vance gave a single, grim nod to his crew. Together, they stepped across the threshold into the cradle's waiting light. The iris door sealing shut behind them with a sound like stone sighing, cutting them off from the world they knew. The air inside the cradle was not cold, but thick, heavy with a scent like ozone and old parchment. It pressed against their skin, a tangible pressure of accumulated thought. The walls were not inert, they shimmered, and as the Guild troopers prodded them forward with rifle barrels, the corridor dissolved around them. One moment they were walking on smooth, glowing stone. The next they were standing on the bridge of a starship they had never seen, surrounded by alien crew members shouting in a language of frantic clicks and whistles. The viewport showed a planet burning, and a sense of profound, unjust rage washed over Vance so completely he gasped. It was not a hologram, it was a memory, raw and unfiltered, and they were living it. The scene flickered, replaced by the cramped interior of a life pod, the air tasting of sweat and recirculated fear as a young engineer sobbed, watching her mothership explode through a tiny porthole. Then another, a captain calmly sealing a bulkhead door, locking himself in with a critical reactor breach to give his crew 30 more seconds to escape. Each memory was a lightning strike of emotion, terror, love, regret, defiance imprinted on the very fabric of the cradle. They were not observers, they were participants drowning in the echoes of the dead. Thorn stumbled toward a raised, crystalline node pulsing in the center of the next chamber. He placed his hands on its surface and his body went rigid. His voice echoed, layered with other whispers. It is a record, a perfect empathic record of every consciousness that died here. The Varelian were not warriors or miners. They were archivists of life itself. They believed a being's true essence was not in its birth, but in its death, the sum of all its choices, its final thoughts, its concluding act. This graveyard is their greatest library. Every wreck is a biography written in steel and sorrow. A Guild trooper barked at him to step away from the node, but Thorn seemed not to hear, lost in the data stream. His eyes were seeing millennia. Vance, meanwhile, was caught in another echo. This one felt different, familiar in a way that chilled his blood. He recognized the layout of the bridge, the model of the navigation console, the patch on the captain's jacket, a stylized bird flying toward a star. It was the emblem of the Starward Bound, his father's ship, lost with all hands when Vance was just a boy, its fate a mystery that had shaped his entire life, driving him into the cold solitude of salvage. In the memory, his father, Captain Vance, was not the smiling man from faded photos. He was older, wearier, his face etched with a terrible resolve. He was speaking into a log recorder, his voice steady but hollow with acceptance. "We misjudged the density of the drift. The hull is compromised. Life support is failing. Tell my son, tell Elias the universe is not empty. It remembers, it holds on to us." Then the memory shifted, showing the starward bound not being torn apart by asteroids, but being gently, deliberately enveloped by tendrils of that same organic tech material that composed the Cradle. It was not a destruction, it was an acquisition, a solemn, respectful filing away of a story. The memory ended not with a scream, but with a profound, aching silence. His father's ship was here. His father's final moments, his last thoughts were here, preserved in this terrible, beautiful archive. The graveyard was not just his workplace. It was his inheritance. The memory of his father's final moments was still a raw echo in his mind when the cold, synthesized voice of the guild commander cut through the chamber's psychic hum. "Stand down and step away from the central node." The order was absolute. The troopers had them cornered in a vast, circular room where the walls themselves seemed to weep with captured light, shimmering with half-formed faces and silent screams. Their leader, Commander Jax, removed his helmet. His face was sharp, disciplined, and utterly devoid of the awe or horror that gripped the others. He looked at the Cradle not as a wonder, but as an asset. "You misunderstand your situation," Jax stated, his eyes locking on Thorn, who was still trembling from contact with the archive. "We are not mere enforcers collecting a lost relic. We are the advanced team for the Ethelwold Corporation's Applied Thanatology Division." He gestured to the swirling memories around them. "This place is not a library. It is a quarry, the richest deposit of cognitive raw material ever discovered." Vance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, raw material. Jax's smile was thin and clinical. "Every consciousness archived here represents a complete neural map, a perfect template of a living mind at its moment of greatest crisis and clarity." Do you comprehend the military application? Imagine a soldier, a pilot, an assassin. They die in the field, and their entire combat experience, their instincts, their will to fight, is instantly transferred into a new, cloned body or a synthetic combat chassis. An army that never truly dies, it simply reloads. This graveyard provides millions of unique templates. The grief of a dying mother, the rage of a betrayed captain, the cold logic of a scientist facing the void, all of it can be weaponized, stripped of context, and forged into a perpetual, obedient legion. Kayla recoiled in disgust. "You would turn their final moments into ammunition." "We are turning sacrifice into strategy," Jax corrected coolly. "Their deaths were a waste. We are giving them purpose." The Event Horizon's core was our test case. We triggered its beacon to see if the archive was still active, still capable of transmission. You simply arrived first and saved us the trouble of sending in our own retrieval team. Now, Dr. Thorn, you will interface with the primary node and initiate a full day to dump to our waiting carrier signal. Thorn shook his head, backing away. "The transfer is not a simple download. It is an empathic resonance. You cannot extract a memory without experiencing it. Your soldiers would be overwhelmed, driven mad by 1,000 simultaneous deaths. A calculated risk," Jax said, nodding to his troops. Their weapons hummed to a higher pitch. "Take them." The first shot was not a blast, but a searing lance of blue energy meant to incapacitate. It struck the crystalline floor at Rourke's feet, and the Cradle reacted. The chamber erupted. The stored memories, agitated by the violent energy, burst from the walls in a storm of holographic ghosts. Suddenly, they were in the middle of 100 different battles, ships exploding, aliens shrieking, hulls buckling, all overlapping in a deafening, chaotic symphony of light and sound. A guild trooper screamed, swatting at a phantom plasma burst that felt utterly real. Another froze, paralyzed by the overwhelming despair of a memory not his own. In the confusion, Rourke acted. He had been subtly running a diagnostic on his multi-tool, scanning for energy conduits. Seeing a major power transfer junction in the wall behind Jax, he made a choice. He slammed the tool's overload function against the glowing conduit and triggered a full emergency energy discharge from his suit's power cell. The effect was catastrophic for the delicate ancient systems. With a deafening crack, the conduit exploded in a shower of sparks and molten crystal. The floor shuddered violently. A section of the organic tech wall between two memory pillars buckled and then collapsed inward, tons of living stone and frozen light crashing down in a thunderous avalanche of debris. The dust and psychic static swirled, creating an impenetrable curtain. When it cleared, Vance and Kayla were on one side of the new, jagged barrier, coughing in the dim light of a secondary passage. On the other side, trapped with the bulk of the guild forces, were Rourke and Dr. Thorne. The last thing Vance saw before the settling dust obscured everything was Rourke's grim face, giving a single, sharp nod of farewell just before Jax grabbed him. They were separated, outnumbered, and the Cradle's heart was now a battlefield. The dust of the collapse settled into a suffocating silence. Vance and Kayla were alone in a narrow, pulsing artery of the Cradle, the psychic echoes now a distant, mournful whisper. The only sound was their own ragged breathing and the deep, resonant thrum of the structure itself. They had no weapons, no ship, and no way back to Rourke. All they had was forward into the light. The corridor sloped downward, the walls growing warmer, the veins of energy brighter and more concentrated, all flowing toward a single point. It felt less like walking and more like being drawn in by a slow, magnetic tide. The passage opened into a vast, spherical chamber, and here the chaos of memories finally resolved. At the chamber's heart, suspended in a column of calm, golden light, was a form. It was not a ghost nor a machine. It was a coalescence of the Cradle's energy, a stable matrix shaped vaguely like the ancient Varelians they had seen in fleeting memory echoes, tall, slender, with large, luminous eyes that held the weight of epochs. It did not speak with a voice. Words formed directly in their minds, clear, calm, and immeasurably sad. You have come to the archive's core. I am the last custodian. The pattern holder, Vance fought the instinct to flinch from the telepathic contact. It felt like a cool, clear stream flowing through his thoughts, utterly alien yet devoid of malice. We did not mean to intrude, Kayla thought back, her mental voice tentative. We were following a signal, a beacon. Yes, the custodian replied. The beacon was a failsafe. A call for a successor. For a species mature enough to understand the purpose of this place and to take up the duty of remembrance. The golden light around it flickered, and for a moment they felt its profound loneliness, a solitude spanning hundreds of thousands of years. My people, the Varelian, were archivists of experience. We believed a civilization's true legacy was not in its monuments, but in the individual moments of its people. Their courage, their love, their final choices in the face of oblivion. When we sensed a ship dying in the void, lost and alone, we would gather it here, not to plunder, to preserve, to ensure no story was ever truly lost. The chamber walls shimmered, showing not flashes of terror but quiet moments. A navigator charting a course for home she would never see, an engineer fixing a toy for a child in a cryopod, two lovers sharing a last silent look. It was a gallery of grace, not just grief. This is the heart of the secret you have sought, the custodian continued, its tone shifting to one of piercing sorrow. But your kind, your guild, your corporations, they do not see stories. They see a resource, a database of neural patterns to be mined, weaponized, sold. They look upon this library of souls and see only an arsenal. The truth of it landed like a physical blow. The guild did not want to learn from the dead. They wanted to duplicate them, to strip the meaning from their ends and turn their essence into a tool. The custodian's light dimmed. The cycle must end. The archive cannot fall into such hands. The integrity of every memory here, the sanctity of every story, depends on a single choice. the column of light brightened, and before them, two distinct patterns of energy emerged from the floor, swirling like liquid constellations. One pattern was a complex, locking spiral of dark blue light. The other was a jagged, red schematic of a transfer conduit. "You can help me initiate a purge sequence," the custodian explained. "The archive will fold in upon itself. The quantum signatures of every stored consciousness will be randomized into background noise, forever irrecoverable. The stories will end truly and finally, but they will die with their meaning intact." The dark blue spiral pulsed, or it said, the red schematic flaring. "You can attempt to salvage the core technology. You can try to extract the central matrix. It would grant you or your guild the key to this entire library. You would possess the greatest treasure in known space and doom every consciousness here to be dissected, copied, and weaponized for eternity." The custodian's gaze, full of ancient wisdom and infinite regret, held them both. "The choice is yours. You are the first visitors in millennia. You will be the last. What is the value of a story? Is it in keeping it safe, even if that means letting it go? Or is it in possessing it, even if possession destroys its very soul?" The choice hung in the air, a weight heavier than any starship hull. But before Vance could speak, the cradle shuddered violently. A new, jagged pain lanced through the psychic atmosphere, not the sorrow of ancient memory, but the sharp, immediate distress of systems under assault. The guild was not waiting. They were cutting their way through. Elsewhere in the labyrinth, trapped with their captors, Rourke and Thorn had been forced down a side passage by the collapsing wall. They emerged into a smaller, dome-like chamber, and there, resting on a pedestal of the same living stone as if placed with reverence, was a familiar, shattered hull section. The nameplate, though scarred, was unmistakable, starward-bound. It was not a memory echo. It was the actual, physical wreckage of Elias Vance's father's ship, preserved here like a sacred relic in a museum of the lost. Jax shoved Thorn forward. "Access its recorder. If the old captain had any tactical data on the Cradle's defenses, I want it." Thorn, his hands shaking, connected his portable scanner to the derelict's black box interface. The device word decrypting the final log. The voice that filled the small chamber was not the panicked officer from the event horizon. It was calm, weary, and filled with a profound, quiet awe. Captain Eli Vance's final message played. "We misjudged the drift, but that is not what killed us. The Varelian came. They showed me everything, the purpose of this place. They showed me that death is not an end here, but a transformation. A story saved, a memory tended, a single note held in a universal symphony. Tell my son. Tell Elias when he looks at the stars and feels alone. It is not a graveyard out here, it is a garden, and every soul is a seed waiting to be remembered." The silence after the log ended was different. Jack scoffed, dismissing it as poetic nonsense, but Rourke saw Thorn's face, saw the pieces click into place with devastating clarity. The guild saw weapons, the custodian saw a library to protect, but Eli Vance had seen the truth: a garden, a place of growth, not decay. The mission was not about salvage or survival anymore. It was about stewardship. As Jax barked orders to his tech to scour the log for usable frequencies, Rourke's engineer mind, always working, saw a different path. His eyes tracked the veins of energy in the walls, flowing toward the central chamber. He thought of the scavenger's hope, crashed and dying on the surface, its main power core still intact but bleeding energy into the void. A wild, desperate idea took root. He leaned subtly toward Thorn, his voice a bare whisper beneath the guild's comms chatter. "Our ship, its core is still hot. If I can trigger a controlled overload and channel the burst through the Cradle's external receptors, it would be a massive, raw power surge, enough to maybe interrupt everything, jam their signals, overload the custodian's transfer protocols, give Vance a fighting chance to make his choice without a gun to his head." Thorn's eyes widened. You would vaporize what is left of the hope, and you would need to be at the ship to do it. They will kill you the moment you move. Rourke gave a faint, grim smile, his gaze fixed on the pulsing walls. Maybe, but a garden needs a shock to the system sometimes to burn out the weeds. Get ready to run the other way on my signal. His plan was a suicide switch, a final, defiant act of rerouting their own death throws into a chance for life, for all the lives suspended in this silent, celestial garden. Rourke's voice crackled over their private comms channel, a thin line of static in the psychic storm. Vance, Kayla, you reading me? I am at the Hope. Jax has Thorn, but I slipped away in the last cave-in. I have a plan. It is not a good one. He explained it quickly, the technical jargon stripped down to its brutal, simple core. He had jury rigged the ship's dying reactor into a massive capacitor. When he triggered the overload, it would flood the Cradle's external receptors with a raw electromagnetic pulse. It would not destroy the archive, but it would scorch every short-range transmitter and scanner in the vicinity, blinding the Guild and buying them time. The cost, he stated plainly, was the complete destruction of the Scavenger's Hope and its reactor, and I have to be here to manually hold the override, or their dampeners will stop it. So I am staying. The transmission cut out before Vance could protest. In the golden light of the core chamber, the custodian watched them, its silent presence underscoring the impossible choice now splitting their crew in two. Vance turned to Kayla, his face a mask of conflict. He relayed the custodian's ultimatum: the purge to save the stories, or the salvage that would doom them. We have a ship, or what is left of one, Kayla argued, her voice fierce with conviction. We have Rourke risking everything to give us this chance. We cannot let the Guild turn this place into a factory for nightmares. This is not salvage, Elias. This is guardianship. It is the only thing we have ever done that actually means something. Vance looked away, his gaze falling to the swirling patterns at their feet. He thought of the mountain of debt to the Guild that had hounded them for years, a chain that had pulled them to this very spot. He thought of the cold equations of survival in the Drift, where sentiment got you killed and every choice was measured in credits and oxygen. Rourke is sacrificing our only way out of here, our only asset, for a library of ghosts, for a principle. What happens after we make this noble stand, Kayla? We float here until our air runs out. We become the next exhibits in this garden. His voice was not angry, but hollow, torn between the man he was and the man his father's log had told him he could be. Their debate was shattered by a searing, metallic shriek. Across the chamber, a section of the organic wall glowed white-hot. The smell of vaporized crystal and ozone flooded the air. With a final, violent burst, a circular segment of the wall melted away, collapsing inward in a shower of molten droplets. Through the new, jagged hole, Guild troopers advanced, their armor smeared with residue, plasma cutters still glowing in their hands. Commander Jack stepped through, his eyes immediately locking onto the custodian's luminous form. Excellent, the primary asset is secure. He ignored Vance and Kayla, pointing a command gauntlet at the central node. Troopers, establish a hardline link to the Iron Judgment. Prepare for data stream extraction. At that moment, Rourke's voice returned, calm and final, echoing in their helmet comms. The loop is hot. The Hope's heart is about to beat for the last time. It has been a good run, Captain. Make the call worth it. A low, building whine began to resonate through the Cradle's very structure, a sound felt deep in the bone. On the surface, the wreck of the Scavenger's Hope started to glow from within, a terrible, building light. Rourke had committed to his one-way trip, turning their past into a weapon to protect a future. The moment for debate was over. The Guild was here, the clock was ticking, and the fate of every soul in the graveyard now rested on the single, terrible decision Vance had to make in the next few seconds. The whine from the dying Scavenger's Hope reached a piercing crescendo, and the Cradle answered. Every memory stored within its walls erupted at once. The core chamber became a storm of light and sound, a cacophony of centuries of final moments. One moment, a phalanx of guild troopers was advancing, their rifles leveled. The next, they were engulfed by the holographic fury of a Varelian starship's last stand, plasma bolts from a forgotten war flashing through their formation. The projections were not solid, but they were disorienting, terrifyingly real to the senses. The troopers faltered, firing wildly at phantoms. Vance saw his opening. He lunged not for a weapon, but for Commander Jax. The two men collided amidst the chaos of 100 different battles, grappling on the floor as images of exploding hulls and silent screams washed over them. Jax was stronger, fueled by corporate certainty, and he slammed Vance against a pulsing crystal node. "You are throwing away the future for a museum," Jax snarled, his face contorted in the flickering light of a dying star. "You are saving ghosts over the living." Vance shoved back, using the momentum to twist them both around. His father's words echoed in his mind, clearer than any memory projection. "We are saving what makes life worth living." He drove his elbow into Jax's armored torso, finding a seam at the shoulder joint. With a grunt of effort, he wrenched the commander's plasma pistol from its grip, sending it clattering across the crystalline floor into the swirling mists of another time. Across the chamber, Kayla had pulled a dazed Thorn to the base of the custodian's column. The ancient being's light was flickering, strained by the violent surge of unleashed memories. "The purge sequence," Kayla shouted over the psychic din. "How do we activate it?" Thorn, his eyes wide with both terror and revelation, placed his palms flat against the central node. "The pattern holder showed me. It requires a conscious choice, a willing signature, not a command, a gift." He looked at Kayla, then at Vance. "It must be given freely." As Vance stood over the disarmed Jax, Rourke's voice crackled through one final, breaking transmission, filled with static and a profound, roaring wind. "The Hope's heart is singing." Cap, light it up. The connection died. On the surface, the scavenger's hope vanished in a silent, expanding sphere of white light and annihilating force. The electromagnetic tsunami hit the cradle. Every light stuttered. Every active system, guild and ancient alike, screamed in overload. The memory storm flickered and died, plunging the chamber into a deep, resonant darkness broken only by the custodian's faint, golden glow. In that sudden silence, Vance knew the cost. Rourke had bought their moment with everything he had. He met Kayla's eyes across the dark, gave a single, solemn nod, and ran to join them at the node. Together, the three of them placed their hands beside Thorn's on the cool, living crystal. They did not give a command, they made an offering, a choice. To let go so that the stories could remain whole. The custodian's light swelled, warm and accepting, and the dark blue spiral at their feet ignited, spinning faster and faster, weaving a final, beautiful lock around the heart of the garden. The purge was not an explosion, but an exhalation. A wave of pure, coherent memory erupted from the custodian's core, a silent tsunami of light and feeling that washed through the chamber and out into the graveyard beyond. It was not a weapon, it was a gift. Every archived soul, every final thought, every cherished moment of love, every pang of sorrow, every spark of defiant joy, all of it was released in a single, overwhelming pulse of empathic truth. The guild troopers were the first to be enveloped. Commander Jax, scrambling for his lost sidearm, froze as the light touched him. His face, a mask of ruthless ambition, dissolved into a cascade of expressions not his own. He felt the profound relief of an engineer who had just sealed a breach to save her crew. He tasted the last kiss of a husband saying goodbye over a failing comms channel. He knew the quiet pride of a gardener tending hydroponic bays on a generation ship, ensuring her descendants would see a new world. He experienced 1,000 deaths, and in each one he felt not the guild's cold calculus, but the raw, beautiful, messy truth of a life concluding. His weapon clattered from his suddenly limp hand. Around him, his soldiers did the same, dropping to their knees or simply standing in stunned silence, tears cutting tracks through the grime on their cheeks as they were flooded with a humanity they had been trained to discard. In the heart of the light, the custodian's form brightened until it was almost too luminous to behold. Its voice, now clear and resonant in all their minds, held a tone of profound peace. The archive is safe, the transmitter is silent, thank you. The gratitude was not just for their choice, but for their understanding, for seeing the garden, not the quarry. Then the cradle itself began to change. The deep, resonant hum that had filled the structure since their arrival shifted in pitch, becoming a chord that vibrated in their very bones. The walls, floor, and ceiling, that intricate lattice of organic technology, began to glow from within with a soft, silver-white light. The ground trembled, but it was not the violent shudder of collapse. It was the deep, tectonic shift of something immense awakening, of roots pulling free. The entire structure, the planetoid-sized mass of fused ships and ancient Varelian technology, was initiating its final, fail-safe protocol. It was not self-destruction, it was a transition, a dimensional shift moving the entire library, every story, every memory, the custodian itself, to a place beyond charts, beyond scanners, beyond the reach of any empire or corporation forever. The garden was leaving, ensuring its flowers could never be plucked for war. The light of the purge faded, leaving behind a profound and ringing silence. Jax and his troopers were on their knees, not in surrender, but in a kind of stunned, shared reverence, their weapons forgotten. The custodian's final gift had disarmed them more completely than any battle ever could. But the deep tremor in the floor was an urgent reminder the garden was leaving, and they were still inside it. "Move," Vance shouted, pulling Kayla and Thorn toward the jagged hole the guild had cut. They scrambled back through the still smoking breach, retracing their path through corridors that now pulsed with that strange, silver-white light, the walls themselves seeming to vibrate with impending departure. It was a race against a clock they could not see, through a labyrinth that was rewriting its own geometry. They burst onto the surface, the fused metal plane of the graveyard now illuminated by the cradle's internal glow shining up through 1,000 cracks and seams. Where the scavenger's hope had crashed, there was only a crater of half-molten alloy, still glowing a faint, angry red. Rurk's sacrifice was a scorched signature on the landscape. Then Kayla pointed, her voice cracking with relief. The pod, the ship's single emergency escape pod, mounted on its dorsal spine, had been sheared off in the crash and lay 30 meters away, half buried in debris but seemingly intact. Its hull was dented, its beacon dark, but the hatch seal still glowed green. It was their only thread of a chance. They clawed their way to it, hauling the hatch open against warped metal. The interior was cramped, built for four in absolute austerity, smelling of stale air and panic. Thorn dove in first, followed by Kayla. Vance paused for one last look at the impossible sight. The entire derelict planetoid, that mountain of dead ships, was now encased in a shimmering silver haze. At its heart, the cradle's light burned like a captured star. Then, without sound, without shockwave, it simply folded. It was as if space itself took a breath and inhaled. The massive structure collapsed inward, shrinking from a mountain to a mote of brilliant light in the blink of an eye, and then to nothing at all. Where a library of souls had rested for millennia, there was only the empty black, punctuated by the distant, cold twinkle of ordinary stars. The pod's engines fired with a cough and a sputter, pushing them away from the now vanished epicenter. As they drifted, the silence felt different. The constant, subconscious hum of the cradle, the psychic pressure they had grown almost accustomed to, was gone. The Seraphis Drift was just a graveyard again, a quiet, cold, and lonely place of metal and memory, holding its secrets in a new and deeper way. The garden had taken its flowers and gone, leaving only the soil behind. The silence inside the escape pod was a living thing, thick with the ghosts of what they had saved and what they had lost. The only sounds were the faint, mechanical sighs of the carbon dioxide scrubbers and the low hum of the minimal life support system. They had air for perhaps 3 more days, They had no ship, no credits, and the only home they had known for years was a smear of atoms scattered across a void that now held an even deeper secret. Kayla was bent over the navigation console, its small screen casting a pale blue light on a determined face. Her fingers moved with a quiet urgency. "I am plotting a course for the free port of Isia," she said, her voice steady despite their circumstances. "It is a remote hub, neutral territory, far from the Guild's main trade lanes. They will have scanned the energy spike from the Cradle's departure. They will assume any signature from the scavenger's hope was consumed in it. To them, we are just another anonymous wreck, another set of names added to the graveyard's ledger." She looked up, meeting Vance's eyes. "It is our chance to start over, to disappear." Thorn, meanwhile, was utterly absorbed by a different kind of salvage. He held a small, iridescent data crystal between his thumb and forefinger, turning it so it caught the dim light. He had snatched it from a secondary node in the final moments before the purge, a reflexive act of an archivist who could not bear to see everything lost. "It does not contain any of the Cradle's core technology," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "The encryption is simple, personal. It is a copy, a single, curated record from the archive." He connected it to the pod's small reader. The file that opened was labeled with a simple, heartbreaking designation: U.S. Starward Bound, Final Personal Logs. Captain Vance, Thorn wordlessly handed the reader to Elias. For a long moment, Vance simply stared at the device, the weight of the crystal in his palm feeling heavier than any engine core. He had spent his life running from the silence his father left behind, diving into the graveyard to confront the very thing that took him, only to find it was not an end at all. He pressed play. His father's voice filled the cramped space, the same calm, weary tone from the fragment they had heard, but now complete. "We misjudged the drift, but that is not what killed us. The Varelian came. They showed me everything, the purpose of this place. They showed me that death is not an end here, but a transformation. A story saved, a memory tended, a single note held in a universal symphony." There was a long pause, filled only with the soft static of the ancient recording. Then the voice softened, becoming intimately direct. "Tell my son, tell Elias, when he looks at the stars and feels alone, it is not a graveyard out here. It is a garden, and every soul is a seed waiting to be remembered." The transmission ended. Vance sat back, the words echoing in the quiet. He looked out the pod's small viewport at the endless field of derelicts, now just dark shapes against the starfield. For his entire career, he had seen them as carcasses, as obstacles and opportunities, the bleak monuments to final failure. Now he saw them through his father's eyes. Each silent hulk was not a tombstone, but a seed pod. The legacy of those crews was not erased. It was preserved, protected by an ancient, caring intelligence that valued the story over the material. The graveyard was not a place of death. It was a vault of life in its most raw and defining forms. He had gone in seeking fortune and found a completely different kind of inheritance. He closed his hand around the data crystal, its edges cool and sharp against his skin. It was not a map to treasure. It was a compass. Kayla finished her calculations, and the pod's thrusters engaged with a gentle push, turning them toward a distant, faint point of light that was Isia. They were adrift, but they were not lost. They were carrying the only thing the garden could not take with it, the understanding of what it truly was. And in that understanding, Vance finally found the thing he had been salvaging for all along, not credit but meaning. A purpose written not in ledgers but in starlight and silence. The air in the pod grew thick and stale, tasting of recycled fear and dwindling hope. The carbon dioxide warning light blinked a relentless, mocking red, counting down breaths they could no longer afford to waste. Vance watched the oxygen percentage tick downward on the console, each digital dip a heavier weight on his chest. The free port of Isia was still a distant speck, a destination they would never reach. Kayla had stopped checking the scanners, her head resting against the cold viewport, her eyes fixed on the endless dark. Thorn simply held the data crystal, as if the memory of the garden could somehow sustain them. The silence was broken not by a sound but by a shimmer, a distortion in the starfield directly ahead, like heat rising off desert stone. Then, with a soft visual pop, a ship resolved into existence. It was not a guild enforcer or a corporate cutter. It was a battered patchwork independent trader, its hull a mosaic of different colored plating, its lines utilitarian and worn. The name stenciled near its bow read Wandering Leaf. A comms channel crackled open, and a woman's voice, dry and laced with a weary cynicism, filled the cabin. "Escape pod, this is the free trader Wandering Leaf, picking up your faint squawk. You look like you're about to become permanent drift ornaments." A docking umbilical extended from the trader with a soft thud, latching onto their airlock. As the hatches sealed and pressure equalized, they stumbled into the Leaf's cargo bay, gulping down the sweet, unfamiliar ship air. The captain stood waiting, arms crossed. She was tall, her hair streaked with gray, and her eyes held the sharp, assessing look of someone who had survived every kind of deal and double cross. "Name's Sarah," she said, her gaze sweeping over their bedraggled forms. "And before you get any ideas, I don't take charity cases. Your engineer, though." The one on the broadcast, he was quite the storyteller in his final act. She pulled a small audio player from her pocket and hit a button. Rourke's voice, strained but clear, echoed in the bay. It was a repeating, automated distress signal, but he had appended a personal message. "If anyone's listening, tell my captain and the doc they'd better make it. They're carrying a story that's worth more than any salvage. It's worth a whole bottle of good whiskey, and I hate drinking alone." Sarah stopped the playback. "A man who prioritizes a good story with his last breath has my attention. So consider this a trade, your passage for the tale, and I'll provide the whiskey." Days later, the Wandering Leaf slid into the bustling traffic lane of the free port of Isir. The docking clamps engaged with a familiar shudder. As they disembarked onto the crowded main concourse, a wall of noise and light engulfed them, the shouts of merchants, the clatter of machinery, the scent of spices and engine grease. Above the throng, massive news feeds glowed on every pillar and bulkhead. The headlines scrolled past, and one in particular froze them in their tracks. "Mysterious energy surge and disappearance in Seraphis Drift," it blared. "Guild reports loss of experimental assets, investigation ongoing, no survivors expected." The report showed sanitized, grainy footage of the drift, carefully omitting any detail of the Cradle. It framed the event as a tragic but contained industrial accident. Commander Jax and his troopers were listed as missing, presumed dead. The Guild had already rewritten the narrative, burying the truth under layers of plausible deniability. Their secret was safe, but so was the Guild's lie. Sarah stood beside them, sipping from a flask, her eyes on the same feed. "Looks like your story just got a lot more expensive," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "And a lot more dangerous to tell." The neon glow of Isir's markets offered anonymity, but it could not erase the weight of their empty pockets. Thorn, however, saw their one remaining asset not as a key but as a keyhole. He vanished into the port's scholarly quarter for 2 days, returning with a look of quiet vindication. He had not sold the crystal. Instead, he had negotiated with a discreet historical collective, granting them exclusive, time-limited access to its curated records, the personal logs of the Starward-bound's crew, their observations of the Varelian, their final days. It was raw, primary source history, a treasure for academics and absolutely worthless to weapons manufacturers. The credit transfer was modest, but it was clean, untraceable, and enough to split 3 ways. Their debt to the Guild and to the past was finally settled. With their share, Vance and Kayla walked the used ship lots, a graveyard of a different sort. They bypassed the sleek, fast couriers and the hulking freighters, their eyes settling on a battered but honest-looking vessel, a Duratech Mark IV planetary surveyor. Its hull was scuffed, its sensor array was 2 generations old, and one of its landing struts had a noticeable weld, but the engine signatures were steady, and the life support logs showed a meticulous maintenance history. It was a ship built for looking, not for taking. They placed their down payment, and the title transferred to a newly minted, anonymous corporate shell. They named it the Garden Tender. On their first night aboard, with the ports clamor a distant murmur through the hull, Vance finally found the courage to be alone with the crystal's final file. He sat in the dim cockpit, the new ship's systems humming a low, unfamiliar song around him, and played his father's full log. The voice filled the space, more present than any ghost. It spoke of the Varelian's gentle guidance, of the peace that came with understanding the Cradle's purpose. Then, near the end, Vance's tone shifted, becoming soft and direct, as if he were sitting in the co-pilot's chair. "I know you'll come looking, Elias. You have my stubbornness and my heart, so listen now. The greatest secret, son, is that some things are meant to be kept, not sold. A story's value isn't in the price it fetches, but in the truth it guards. Your mother's laugh, your first solo flight, the quiet between stars, these are the treasures no ledger can hold. Protect them, tend them, that is the only work that matters." The log ended. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full. The restless, chasing void inside Vance finally stilled, replaced by a profound and steady certainty. He was not a salvager anymore, he was a keeper, and he had a new garden to tend, its borders as wide as the sky itself. The new ship's hum was a quieter, steadier companion. For weeks, the garden tender mapped quiet asteroid belts and catalogued nebula gases, its sensors tuned to the mundane rhythms of the cosmos. The past felt sealed away, a chapter ended. Then, during a routine calibration sweep of the long-range comms array, the console emitted a soft, persistent chirp. It was not an alarm, but a whisper. A signal so faint it bled into the background static of the universe. Kayla froze, her hands hovering over the controls. She ran a filter, stripping away the noise. What remained was a pattern, a rhythmic, pulsing sequence of quantum harmonics. It was hauntingly familiar. The structure was Varelian, the same elegant, mathematical language of the Cradle's beacon, but the melody was different. Distorted, as if broadcast through a shattered lens, and originating from a point millions of light years beyond the Seraphis Drift, in a sector marked on their charts only as uncharted volatile. She looked across the cockpit at Vance, her expression a silent storm of dread and a fierce, kindling excitement. "It is a different frequency," she said, her voice barely above the ship's gentle thrum. A different invitation. Vance leaned forward, studying the scrolling data. The signal was not a memory, it was active, broadcasting into the present. After a long moment, the distortion cleared, resolving not into a complex map or a ghostly log, but into a single, stark set of spatial coordinates. A pinprick of light in the absolute unknown. He did not hesitate. His hands moved to the navigation console, inputting the new heading. The ship's engines responded with a deep, gathering power, turning them away from the safe, surveyed lanes and toward the dark. "Some secrets," Vance said, a slow smile touching his lips as the stars began to streak past the viewport, "are just the first page." The garden tender's new heading felt like a clean line drawn through the void, but the universe has a way of folding back on itself. In the dim, smoky haze of the free port of Isia's lowest-level cantina, a place where the light was too poor to see a face clearly, and the noise was too loud for a scanner to pick out a single conversation, Elias Vance sat with his back to the wall. He was waiting for a parts dealer, a simple transaction for a new atmospheric condenser. The figure that slid into the booth opposite him was not the dealer. The man was gaunt, his face etched with deep lines that had nothing to do with age, and he wore the plain, durable clothes of a dockworker, but the eyes gave him away. They held a sharp, military precision that even months of hiding could not erase. It was Commander Jax. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. He did not offer a greeting. His voice was a low, urgent rasp meant only for Vance's ears. They did not just lose an asset when the Cradle vanished. They lost the cornerstone of a new era of warfare. A war-winning weapon erased from the board. The Ethelwold Corporation's entire applied thanatology division was built on the promise of that archive. Their stock plummeted, key investors pulled out, heads rolled, and they are not the type to write off a loss. Vance kept his expression neutral, his hands flat on the table. What does that have to do with me? We are just another salvage crew that got lucky and got out. Jax leaned forward, his gaze unblinking. The pulse from the Cradle, the one that showed me things. It was not just light, it was a quantum signature, a unique energy fingerprint. Their deep-range sensors logged every ship within 100,000 kilometers of the event horizon before the collapse. Every engine signature, every comm squawk, every life support frequency. Your old ship, the Scavenger's Hope, is on that list, and so is the faint, residual trace of the pod you escaped in. They have flagged every signature on that log for active termination, not capture, termination. To them, you are not witnesses. You are loose ends that could unravel a trillion-credit cover-up. You, your engineer, the doctor, your new ship, you are all marked. The noise of the bar seemed to recede, replaced by a cold ringing in Vance's ears. He saw Rourke's face, the calm nod before the light took him. The garden tender, with Kayla and Thorn aboard right now, was a quiet, unarmed survey ship painted with a target it could never see. Why are you telling me this? Jack's eyes flickered, and for a moment the ruthless commander was gone, replaced by a man drowning in a memory not his own. He had seen 1,000 final moments in the custodian's purge, felt the weight of every story. I spent 20 years believing strength was in control, in turning chaos into a tool. What I felt in that pulse, it was not chaos, it was meaning. I saw a gardener tending flowers, not a soldier stacking munitions. I will not help them turn a garden into a graveyard again. I cannot. With a fluid, practiced motion, he slid a small, matte black date, a chip across the sticky tabletop. It contained encrypted guild patrol routes for this sector and the next 3, updated research outpost locations, the ones scanning for anomalous cognitive echoes. Black site designations. It is not a map to safety. It is a map of the hunting grounds. Use it to stay out of the light. He held Vance's stare for one final, heavy second, a silent transfer of a burden he could no longer carry. Then he was gone, melting into the shifting crowd of traders and drifters as if he had never been there at all, leaving only the cold chip on the table and a warning that had just rewritten the borders of their newfound freedom. The open sky was no longer open. It was a watched space, and they were being hunted for the one secret they had vowed to keep. The data chip felt like a shard of ice in Vance's palm, colder than the void outside the hull. Back aboard the garden tender, they gathered around the small galley table, the chip's contents projected into the air between them, a constellation of red threat markers and cold clinical notations. It was not just a warning, it was a blueprint of their own extinction. Running, they realized, was a temporary solution. The guild's net was cast wide, and their sensors grew more sophisticated by the day. We could change our ship's signature again, Kayla said, her finger tracing a patrol route on the map. We could dive into the deepest, darkest rifts, but for how long? A year, 10. They will never stop looking because we are proof their greatest failure was real. Thorn, who had been silent, studying the data with an archaeologist's intensity, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but carried a new, steely resolve. We have been thinking like prey. We should start thinking like gardeners. He zoomed the projection out beyond the guild's hunting grounds to the vast, uncharted volumes of the galaxy. The Cradle was not unique. The Varelian were an interstellar civilization. If they built one memory vault, they built others. The Guild's research outposts are not just hunting for us. Look at their scan parameters. They are listening for specific quantum harmonic echoes. They are searching for another site. the implication settled over them, heavy and clear. The guild had not given up on the weapon. They had simply shifted from retrieval to discovery. They were prospecting for a new graveyard to strip mine. Vance looked from the star map to the faces of his crew. Kayla, the brilliant navigator who could find a path through anything. Thorn, the archivist who could speak the language of the dead. And himself, a salvager who now understood that some things must never be salvaged. They possessed together a combination of skills and knowledge no one else in known space had. "We cannot outrun them forever," Vance said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke, "but we can get in their way." "Exactly," Thorn replied, a fierce light in his eyes. "We do not run, we protect. We find these places before the guild does, and we make sure they stay secret. We become the caretakers the Varelian no longer have. We learn their patterns, intercept their data, and redirect their searches. We bury the seeds so deep no one can ever dig them up." A slow, grim smile touched Kayla's lips. "Then we need a name, something that fits, not soldiers, not spies." She looked at the verdant green shoot of a hydroponic bean plant she was nurturing in the corner of the galley, a tiny rebellion against the sterile metal ship. "We are not digging for treasure, we are tending something that needs to stay hidden. We are the gardeners." The name hung in the air, perfect in its simple defiance. It was a quiet promise. Their first operation presented itself almost immediately. Cross-referencing Jax's data with Thorn's historical models of Varelian transit corridors, they identified a high-probability zone in the Lyra Nebula. Guild activity there had spiked. A single, well-armed survey vessel, the cartographer's blade, had just begun a meticulous grid scan of the region. Its mission profile was a perfect match for artifact discovery. "They are listening in the right place," Kayla confirmed, her screens alive with intercepted comms traffic, "and they are getting faint, anomalous returns. They have not pinpointed it yet, but they are close." A direct confrontation was impossible. The blade was a warship in all but name, but a gardener's work was not about force. It was about subtlety. Rourke would have called it creative sabotage, Vance thought, a pang of loss sharpening his focus. Their plan took shape through the night. The cartographer's blade relied on long-range, sensitive harmonic resonators to filter signal from cosmic noise. Thorn believed he could synthesize a counter-frequency, a burst of empathic static modeled on the Cradle's final pulse, but stripped of its meaning, just raw, chaotic psychic noise. It would not damage the ship. It would simply flood its primary sensors with gibberish, making the real signal impossible to find, and hopefully trigger enough system errors to convince the crew they were in a naturally hazardous psychic region. "We seed the field with weeds," Kayla said, refining the delivery vector. "We use a short-range probe disguised as nebula debris. We get it close, broadcast the pulse for exactly 47 seconds, and let the distortion do the rest. They will think they hit a dead zone, a natural phenomenon. They will log it and move on." It was a small act, a single ship turned away from a single secret. But as the garden tender slipped into the glowing dust clouds of the Lyra Nebula, shadowing the unsuspecting cartographer's blade, it felt like the first true step on a new path. Vance manned the helm, no longer a fugitive but a sentinel. Kayla prepared the probe, her hand steady. Thorn monitored the guild ship's sensor sweeps, whispering adjustments to his harmonic algorithm. They were no longer just survivors. They were guardians stepping into the shadows to keep the light of a forgotten garden safe for one more day, and then the day after that. The universe had its hunters. Now quietly it had its gardeners too. The sower hung in the shadow of a nickel-iron asteroid, its hull painted the same dull gray as the surrounding rock. Ahead, the sleek, predatory shape of the guild survey vessel cartographer's blade moved with methodical precision, its powerful sensor arrays pulsing as they combed the asteroid belt for the faintest harmonic echo. Inside the sower's cockpit, the air was thick with a silence more tense than any alarm. This was their first test, not as salvagers but as gardeners. Vance watched the blade scan pattern on his screen, his fingers hovering over the manual thruster controls. They had one shot at this. The plan was a ghost story written in sensor noise and false echoes. Kayla's voice was a low murmur in the dim light. Their primary resonator is sweeping Sector 7 now. They are filtering for Varelian quantum decay patterns. Initiating the phantom signal in 3, 2, 1. She tapped a command. From a small, disguised probe they had planted hours earlier, a burst of energy flared. It was not a true Varelian signal, but a brilliant forgery, a synthesized echo of the Cradle's final pulse, artfully distorted to sound like a natural, decaying artifact. To the blade's sophisticated scanners, it would look like the faint, crumbling signature of a long-dead outpost, nothing of real value. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blade's course shifted slightly, angling toward the phantom signal. "Good," Thorne whispered from the engineering station, his eyes glued to the data stream. "They have taken the bait. They are moving to investigate." Now came the dangerous part. As the guild ship drew closer to the false signal, Vance engaged the Soa's thrusters with a feather-light touch. They drifted from their hiding place, moving behind a different, larger asteroid. From a launch tube, they released a cloud of pre-processed metallic chaff and charged particles, the kind typically left by a recent minor asteroid collision. To the blade, it would appear as a sudden, localized debris field swirling around the phantom signal source, a natural hazard obscuring their scan. On the comms, they heard the blade's bridge chatter, intercepted and filtered through their console. Unstable debris field forming around the source, a guild technician reported, frustration evident. Scan integrity is failing. Probability of valuable artifact retrieval dropping below 5%. Commander's call. There was a tense pause, then the clipped, authoritative voice of the blade's captain. "Abort the scan. Mark this sector as a high interference zone and log the coordinates for a passive review in 6 standard months." No point wasting fuel on cosmic static. The cartographer's blade's engines glowed blue as it turned, pivoting away from the asteroid belt and accelerating back toward the safer, known shipping lanes. A wave of silent relief washed through the Soa's cabin. "They are turning away," Kayla reported, her shoulders finally dropping from their tense hike. Planting the false data packet now, she sent a pre-programmed burst transmission toward the general area the guild had just scanned. It was a data ghost, a packet designed to be found by any future cursory sweep. It would contain corrupted logs, meaningless mineral surveys, and false positive readings, further discouraging any serious return. Their mission was a success. They had protected a secret, not with weapons, but with whispers and misdirection. As they prepared to withdraw, Thorne, still monitoring the long-range passive scanners, let out a sharp breath. "Wait, do not power down the deep band receivers." He adjusted a frequency, filtering out the background noise of the belt. "There is something else. It is not our phantom. It is underneath it, a low-level energy reading buried deep within the resonant frequency of the asteroids themselves." It was faint, a single, pure note almost lost in the cosmic symphony. But its structure was unmistakable, Varelian, not a decaying echo but a steady, sleeping hum. A sentinel pulse so deep and so well integrated with the natural rock that no standard scan would ever find it unless you knew exactly what to listen for and exactly where to look. They had come to plant weeds, and instead they had found the edge of a root system. Thorne's face was illuminated by the soft, rhythmic glow on his screen. "It is a marker, a waypoint. This is not a dead site. It is a dormant one, part of a network." The cartographer's blade had been looking for a treasure chest. The gardeners had just found a single thread in a tapestry woven across the galaxy, a hidden map written in the quiet language of stone and starlight. Their purpose was no longer a theory. It was a geography waiting to be learned. The memorial wall at Isia was not an official monument. It was a patchwork of welded steel plates in a forgotten service corridor, covered in thousands of names etched by laser cutter, painted by hand, or simply scratched with a metal stylus. It was the free port's true heart, a record of the vanished, the ones the official logs forgot. Vance stood before it, a small engraving tool humming softly in his hand. He found a small space of bare metal near the bottom. With careful, deliberate strokes, he added two names, Captain Arlen Vance, U.S. starward bound, and below it simply, Rurk. Engineer, Scavenger's Hope. He did not list dates or epitaphs. Their stories were not for this wall. They were carried elsewhere, one in a garden of light, the other in the memory of a final, defiant act. He was about to turn away when a shadow fell across the names. A young man, no older than Vance had been when he first took a salvage contract, stood shifting his weight. His jumpsuit was new but already stained with reactor grease, his eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and awe. "You are him," the young man said, his voice barely above the corridor's constant ventilation hum. "Elias Vance, I have seen the old guild bulletins, the wanted for questioning alerts they scrubbed a few months back. They said you were a thief, but the whispers in the docks. They say something else." Vance remained silent, waiting. The young salvager glanced up and down the empty corridor, then leaned closer. "Is it true?" he whispered. "What they say about the Seraphis Drift, that there are ghosts out there, that ships speak?" The question hung in the recycled air. Vance looked from the young man's eager face back to the two new names on the wall. He thought of the frozen terror in the event horizon, the peaceful resolve in his father's log, the storm of 1,000 final moments in the Cradle's heart. He thought of the difference between a ghost, a thing that haunts, and an echo, a remnant of something that once was whole and beautiful. He met the young man's gaze, his own voice low and steady. "Not ghosts," he said, "echoes, and some echoes deserve to be left in peace." The young salvager blinked, the easy thrill of a ghost story evaporating, replaced by something more complex. He looked at the wall of names, then back at Vance, understanding dawning that the universe held mysteries deeper and more fragile than any tale of specters. He gave a slow, thoughtful nod, not of disappointment but of receipt. He had asked for a rumor and been given a principle. Without another word, the young man turned and walked back toward the bustling docks, his step a little slower, his gaze a little more observant. Vance watched him go. The lesson would not be found in any salvage manual or guild contract. It was a quiet truth passed in a corridor, a seed planted in new soil. The work of a gardener was not just about hiding secrets. It was about cultivating the right kind of silence so that the echoes could resonate undisturbed forever. The hum of the sower's engines was a quiet counterpoint to the storm of data swirling on Thorne's console. For weeks, he had worked in near silence, cross-referencing the salvaged crystal with every fragment of Varelian linguistics and quantum mechanics they had. The breakthrough came not with a shout, but with a soft, startled exhale. "I have been reading it wrong," he whispered, his eyes wide behind the glow of the screen. The crystal is not just a personal log, it is a key. It unlocked a secondary data layer, a schematic hidden beneath the surface of his father's words. What resolved on the main display was not a star chart of derelicts or weapon caches. It was a network. Delicate lines of soft light connected a handful of star systems across the spiral arm, each node marked not with a ship's name, but with a single, elegant Varelian glyph. Kayla leaned in, her brow furrowed. "Sanctuaries," Thorne nodded, his voice trembling with awe. "Not archives, not static libraries. The Cradle was a sorting station, a temporary holding place. These locations, they are something else. They are recovery sites, biosphere-ready worlds engineered long ago. The Verelia did not just preserve consciousness. They designed a cycle under specific, stable conditions, a compatible biosphere, a certain harmonic resonance in the planetary magnetosphere. The stored patterns could be gently reintroduced into new, organic life. A seedling grown from the memory of a forest, the garden was never meant to be a permanent vault. It was a nursery. The final piece was the message they had missed. Thorn triggered the last file on the crystal. The voice that filled the cabin was not Vance's. It was the calm, resonant telepathic impression of the custodian they had met in the heart of the cradle, its tones somehow preserved in the data stream. You have seen the truth of the archive. You understand its purpose is not hoarding but continuity. Our work is complete. The garden was never meant to be eternal. It was meant to recede. You are the gardeners now. The words hung in the air, imbued with a gravity that made the ship itself feel smaller. The message was not a suggestion. It was a passing of the torch across millennia. Their mission shattered and reformed in that instant. Protection was merely the first step, the weeding of the garden. This was different. This was stewardship on a cosmic scale. They were not just hiding secrets from the guild. They were being entrusted with the potential for rebirth. The responsibility was terrifying, a weight that stretched across generations. Vance stared at the map of sanctuaries, each point a promise and a profound obligation. The guild sought to weaponize the past. The Varelian had dreamed of gifting it a future, and now, impossibly, that dream rested in the hands of a salvager, a navigator, and an archivist drifting in a patched-up ship. The scope of their quiet war had just expanded from the shadows of graveyards to the very possibility of life itself. The warp drive engaged with a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the deck plates and into their bones. Outside the viewport, the familiar stars of the charted lanes stretched into brilliant lines, then dissolved into the seamless blue-white tunnel of faster-than-light travel. They were leaving everything behind: the guild's hunting grounds, the ghost of the Seraphis Drift, the fragile safety of Isia. Their new heading was set for the coordinate from the distant, distorted signal, a single point of light in the absolute unknown. Vance kept his hands on the helm console, not because the ship needed guidance in the warp lane, but because he needed to feel the steady pulse of the engines, the proof of forward motion. The journey from the captain's chair of the Scavenger's Hope to this one felt less like a linear path and more like a slow, inevitable orbit around a truth he had only just begun to see. He was no longer a man sifting through the bones of the dead looking for scraps to sell. He was a keeper of seeds holding a library of souls in trust, and the weight of it was both terrifying and quieting. Kayla moved to stand beside him, her presence a familiar anchor. She watched the streaking light of the warp tunnel for a long moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but sure. "The graveyard gave up its secret," she said, her voice soft against the engine's hum. "Now we have to decide what to grow from it." Her words were not a question but a statement of their new reality. The secret was no longer a mystery to be uncovered but a responsibility to be shouldered. They had the map, the key, and the warning. What they built with that knowledge, a sanctuary, a shield, a legacy, was a choice they would make with every jump, every scan, every silent act of protection. As the ship hurtled onward, a final echo rose unbidden in Vance's mind. It was not a memory of his own, but a whisper left in the quiet places of his consciousness by the custodian's final gift, a gentle imprint from the Varelian archive. Two words carried on a tide of ancient sorrow and boundless hope. "Remember us." The whisper did not fade. It blended seamlessly with the deep, constant hum of the sowers' engines, becoming part of the ship's song, part of their purpose. It was a solemn duty etched in starlight, and an infinite possibility waiting in the dark. Ahead, the warp tunnel held only the promise of the unknown. Behind them, a garden of echoes slept in peace. And between those two eternities, the gardeners flew on, tending the silence between the stars.